We're going to start off by talking about the Netflix show that is actually called Warrior Nun. Now, I am somewhat familiar with Warrior Nun because I know it is loosely based off of Warrior Nun Ariella that Antarctic Press published back in the day. So I'm going to read the synopsis here a little bit, and then we'll just kind of talk about the first episode. Again, this is Warrior Nun. The episode is named Psalm 46:5. I'm going to read you the synopsis here that's on IMDb. It basically says, after waking up in a morgue, an orphan teen discovers she now possesses superpowers as the chosen halo bearer for a secret sect of demon-hunting nuns. And again, like I said, this is based or loosely based off of Warrior Nun Ariella, the series that was created by Ben Dunn, that used to be published or might still be published by Antarctic Press. The cast is a lot of people I was not terribly familiar with. Alba Baptista, Toya Turner, who actually plays Shotgun Mary. That's another character some people that read the Antarctic Press series back in the day would be very familiar with. Kristen, Lorena Andreas. It's a lot of interesting sounding names. I didn't recognize many of them, but that didn't hurt. That didn't hurt the show at all. So let's go ahead and just talk about our initial impressions. Do you want to go ahead and go first, Eric?
Yeah, I can go ahead and go first. I apologize. I lost some of my articles and things like that, but I'll get them back later because I did make sure to tag them. Okay. As Dave mentioned, one thing that's interesting about this is, first of all, I am familiar with the comic in terms of that I know it exists, and I remember vaguely when it came out. It would have come out in the later part of my high school days, and so it was kind of like on my radar a little bit. I remember, you can see with the image that Dave put out here, that you can actually see one of the comic covers here. And of course, it is very striking. It's very striking. I remember it being kind of controversial. I myself actually did attend Catholic high school and Catholic elementary school. I even went to a Catholic college for a semester. So I'm very steeped in that. My family was very religious and very traditional Catholics and things like that. So I remember, when this imagery and stuff like that came out, I didn't know exactly what to think about it because I thought it might be a little bit kind of like, sacrilegious. So I never actually really read the comic book. I'm very familiar with Antarctic Press. And in fact, there was another series that they did. Dave, I'm not sure if you're that familiar with it. I believe it was called like Ninja High School or something like that. That Bill Dunn also did. The creator of
Ninja High School. That was quite popular.
Yes.
And then in the interest of full disclosure, Antarctic Press did self-publish Star Gods, my first creator-owned series. So
there you go.
I'm very well steeped in it, and I'm very familiar with Warrior Nun Ariella, or at least Warrior Nun in a general sense, because they were Warrior Nun was one of their big hits at the time. Antarctic Press was making toys, and Warrior Nun actually was very successful for them. And they were in the process. They actually attended a licensing show, and one of the properties they were pitching was Warrior Nun, which is interesting because it's a Netflix show now. And in addition to that, they were also pitching Star Gods at that same show. I have materials that actually have, like, it's a sample book that they were handing out to attendees, and it has information on actually both of these properties. So,
and then Larry says, if I recall right, Dave doesn't like ninjas. Is that true, Dave? Larry says you don't like ninjas.
Okay, so it's not that I dislike ninjas. It's just I consider myself more samurai than ninja. So
I gotcha. Okay.
So there's just there's just a rivalry that exists between samurai and ninja. So I don't dislike them, but I don't necessarily trust them either.
Well, the reason I brought that up was because I remember the Ninja High School comic all over the place, going to comic book stores in that era. I don't remember Warrior Nun as much, but I do remember it. I think they even came out with a limited, like one of those direct market figures for it at one time that was pretty striking. But again, the imagery was something that especially at the time, I wasn't sure what to make of it. So I never really picked up the comic and actually read it. I don't think I even really leafed through it. It kind of was like, I don't know, forbidden. Even though nobody told me I couldn't take it, it was just in my mind. I was all like, I don't think that's something that I would like. It's kind of funny because doing research for this episode, I decided to look into the comic a little bit more and also to try to find out what's different from the comic and the television series. And I even went to Bill Dunn's Facebook and saw his comment. And it's kind of interesting because it sounds like a lot of the fans of the comic book are kind of upset about the show because it's very different. The show is very different from the comic book, especially some of the articles that I read as far as the content. The creator himself, he actually said that he understood the differences. In other words, he was not criticizing them. He was saying, hey, I get it. He actually, what he kind of implied was, hey, if this show is really popular, maybe we can get an anime that's going to be more faithful to the comic. So I thought I would just kind of throw that out there just because I don't have any personal knowledge of the book, so I can't really compare. One of the main reasons that we wanted to do this review was obviously the show just came out on Thursday, so it's very topical. But the other thing is, I think Dave and I both, we like to review things and look at things that come from independent media. And, Antarctic Press is a very independent, comic book publishing company. It's not DC. It's not Marvel. As I mentioned, I recall the Ninja High School stuff as a kid. What I also really recall was for a while, Antarctic Press had the Robotech license. And I used to check out quite a few of those. I think I actually own a fairly decent number of the Antarctic Press Robotech comic books. So interestingly enough, they actually got into licensing as well. They licensed a different product, rather than licensing their original product.
Yeah, they had the license for Robotech. They also had the license at one point for Gigantor, Captain Harlock. Those, again, talking about anime. The Antarctic Press was an interesting publisher. I'm going to spare everyone some of my stories I usually tell because my anger has mellowed with my age. Because of some things that happened back in the day. But they're a pretty prolific publisher. They're still around. They're still going. They've been able to license their characters into various media as represented here by the Warrior Nun Netflix series. And I'm happy to celebrate their success. I think that's really cool and awesome. So let me talk about my initial impressions just briefly here. So I, again, was familiar with Warrior Nun primarily because of my association with Antarctic Press back in the day, as I mentioned earlier. It's not a series that I read. I think I actually looked at the figures probably more than anything because Antarctic Press at the time was helping us to actually launch a Star Gods action figure line that unfortunately didn't come to pass. But so I was probably more familiar with the action figures per se. And so I walked into this a little bit steeped into the iconography, which the iconography from the comic is completely gone. I mean, it's not that it's unrecognizable. It's just not the same thing visually. I don't think it hurts the production necessarily. To me, it had a weird kind of Blade vibe at times. And then a little bit of the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. For those people that might have seen Sabrina on Netflix, it kind of, for me, fell in between those two productions, somewhere in between Blade and Sabrina. I'm going to be honest with you, I was kind of surprised. I found it kind of interesting, and I was curious to see more. I wasn't expecting that. When it first kind of started, I was like, okay, all right, this is going to be whatever. But as it went on, I found myself actually kind of very intrigued by the lead character's story, which is interesting too, because our lead character is not Ariella, the character from the comic. I don't want to get into a lot of heavy spoilers, but that's not who we follow. We actually follow someone else, and her story I found very interesting. And again, as Eric mentioned, I could, I'll be honest with you, I could tell from just watching this, they changed a lot. I mean, having not even read the comic, I could just tell you from just visually, like they've changed a lot about this particular production. And I picked this image because if you can see in this image, this is what I'm talking about. It reminded me very much of Blade. And if you've seen Blade, specifically like Blade 2, it had a lot of that kind of feel about it. But like I said, I was surprised. I kind of enjoyed it. I didn't hate it at all. I was curious to see the second episode, which is surprising because there's not a lot of action. Did you notice that, Eric? There's not a lot of action in this. It's just a lot of story.
Yeah, it's very much, I guess, a setup episode, which makes sense. Obviously, it's the pilot, so it does make it obviously is trying to set things up. I saw a lot of questions after the first episode, which I guess is which can be good, but they weren't necessarily like some. I think they could have put a little bit more into it to give me a little bit more of the world and what it is that I'm actually looking at. My guess is that there's a lot of stuff that they want to reveal later in the series, and that's why you don't get a lot of that information. So I did go back and try to look at the source material more. As I mentioned, I haven't actually read the comic book, so I kind of wanted to know more about the source material. So I went ahead and I did read some articles about it, and I did pick up on what you said, Dave, that this is a completely different character than the character that's in the actual comic book, which I thought was really weird, and I'm not sure why they decided to do that, other than maybe the obvious reason of age. I don't know what age the original character is supposed to be. Maybe they just wanted a younger actress, that kind of a thing, to kind of tell the tale a little bit better in a more quite frankly obvious way, I guess. I don't know. I was actually more intrigued by the source material as I read it. I'm just going to put that out there. I wanted to go ahead and actually go out and buy a Warrior Nun comic book and compare it to the show after watching this. So in that sense, it's really kind of good because it got me interested in the source material, made me think, I want to pick up some Warrior Nun comics and take a look at them and compare them to the show, because the research that I did, I think the comic book premise is better than this one. That's just my initial impression without ever having read any of the books. I'm just strictly going by my research and the articles that I read that sort of compared the two and just gave you a basic kind of summary of what the comics were like and how it's kind of different than the television show. So I was actually more intrigued with the setup material of what I read about the comic book than I was with the show, which I think is kind of ironic. But it's also good in a way because the show made me interested in the comic book.
Well, and that's one of the great things about media, is if you can do a good job, you can do that. You can get people interested, hopefully in the source material, so they're going to want to go back and investigate it. And it's curious, Eric, because if it were me, I would try and find a trade or a collection of the original Warrior Nun comics, because I think that's where you're going to see probably your greatest contrast between what they're doing here in the show versus what the original comics might have been about. Like I said, I mean, I found the show to be kind of interesting, though, even with that sort of, because I could tell they changed a lot. But I still found it kind of interesting. But like I said, I really like Blade and that world, that kind of idea. And this felt heavily influenced stylistically anyway by Blade. I mean, even with the rave scene, I was waiting for them to.
I was just going to say that. That's exactly what I was going to say, Dave. Yeah. Was that rave scene? Yeah, that totally brings me back to Blade. In fact, for we had some issues in preparing the show, in that for our retrospective segment, we kind of had to switch things at the last minute because it turned out what we were going to review initially wasn't on the streaming service that we both have. So we have to coordinate that stuff, and we didn't realize, this thing actually isn't on that streaming service. So we were scrambling for the second part of the show. We decided on Batman Mask of the Phantasm in large part because that's currently available on Netflix. So it's available on a wide streaming platform, and we're reviewing a Netflix show anyway. But the one that I was going to suggest, Dave, at first was Blade, but I couldn't find it on anything. I couldn't find it on anything that I was sure we both had. In fact, I couldn't really find it on any of the subscription services except I think it's on HBO now. It's actually on HBO now.
Hmm.
Blade is the original Blade.
Interesting.
So, which I thought would have been a great contrast to the show. So I wanted to put that out there because we didn't talk about that. But I was going to originally say, hey, let's do Blade because it would be such a perfect complement to this show.
Yeah, the only difference is Blade kicks a lot of ass. Just gonna say.
He does. Yeah,
Because
as
that
you
was
mentioned,
I found myself wanting to watch Blade.
Right. No, as you mentioned, there's surprisingly little action in this first episode, and of course you have the anticipation. And I've watched the trailer also. I did watch the trailer for the show, so I got to see some additional scenes from other episodes. Obviously, the promise is there for a lot more action to happen in future episodes. But as you mentioned, it is surprisingly very action light.
Again, that's why I said I would compare it to the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina or just Sabrina on Netflix. It sits in between Blade and Sabrina because Sabrina, they do a lot of fun. Well, both of these shows are highly blasphemous, but anyhow, I was just going to say Sabrina. That was a joke. Sabrina, like, kind of does a lot of fun stuff, but it's the same thing. It's a lot of setup. It's a lot of ambiance. It's a lot of, sort of quasi teen drama, and then something crazy, magical, whatever kind of happens. And that's what this reminded me of in the same way, because Sabrina will sometimes kind of play something out a little bit more than maybe a movie would. Like a movie will set something up and then go straight for the throat. But I noticed that Sabrina and this show both, they have a similar kind of structure. But I liked Sabrina and I liked this. That was the thing that was, because I'll be honest with you, because we discussed doing this, we thought, we'll check it out. Why not? But because I did not care for the Witcher so much, I was kind of thinking like, there's no way in the world I'm going to like this thing. But I kind of found it interesting. At the end, when it ends, I found myself kind of actually wanting to see more, and I was kind of surprised at that. But I enjoyed kind of what I did get to see of this world that they were crafting. And then part of it too, I think, is the fact that you don't get a lot of answers because my imagination runs wild, and I'm beginning to go, okay, well, what about this and what about that, and it actually makes me more invested than maybe under normal circumstances I might have been. So that was the thing that surprised me the most about this. I'm actually curious to see what happens in the second episode. So.
Well, that's obviously good. That's what a first episode is supposed to do. It's supposed to draw you in to watch the second one. And it's kind of funny, I see in a lot of reviews, sometimes you get this, even from people that are highly critical. They'll say like, okay, well, I usually judge a series by its second season or by its fourth season. I mean, I've literally heard things that I think is that stupid. Obviously, every show, it's all about that first episode, whether it's going to make you want to watch the second episode or not. And as Dave said, this episode did what it was meant to do for him. It made him want to watch the second episode. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure if it did the same for me. I am open to continuing to review this show. I didn't hate it, but I felt like, as I alluded to earlier, I felt like it almost didn't give me enough in sort of a bad way. Again, I am more interested in my research of the source material than I am in this show right now. I'm more feeling like I want to go out and actually buy the comic book and check it out because of the differences that I've heard between the two. And I'm like, I think the comic book might be more for me. And I'm thinking the show, I'm not sure. Part of the reason for that is that this show is very modern. So if you kind of like the modern, I guess the modern storytelling, I would compare this show very much in terms of a lot of the, not so much the style, I guess the theme. I would compare the theme very much to the most recent incarnations of Star Wars and Star Trek. And I'm talking specifically about Picard, and I'm talking about Star Wars, The Fall of Skywalker, or whatever the last one was. I really hated that movie, so I'm not going to call it by its right name. But the central premise is the same. It doesn't really reveal anything to say this because it is called Warrior Nun, so you would kind of assume this. But it kind of has that same contrivance that we've seen many times before, where you have this sort of female, young female character that is like the key to everything. And that's kind of the setup that we're getting in this. And it's like literal. I don't want to get into the spoiler there until we actually go into spoilers, but it's like literally she is like the key to everything. And I've seen that so many times, I'm kind of getting sick of it. Does that make any sense, Dave?
It does. It does. It makes a lot of sense. I was just going to point out the fact that it's weird because it feels like it's hitting on that same thing. And what you're talking about is what they sometimes refer to as the Mary Sue. It's kind of what they...
No, I would not say this is Mary Sue, by the way. I would not say that.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that because the way that she gets her powers, people might argue that's Mary Sue, but it's like basically saying, again, I don't want to do a spoiler, but it's basically saying like no object can give you powers. That's kind of like saying the Green Lantern is a Mary Sue because he puts a ring on, now he has powers. Well, that's just the contrivance of the power. The idea that an object gives you power, I get that.
Right.
No, I totally get that.
Yeah, you make a good point. All I was trying to get at though is that the difference in terms of context is that Warrior Nun is a comic book series that goes back to 1994.
Right.
Like this exists because Warrior Nun came out of this period in the comics when they were doing quote unquote the bad girl stuff. So which
blade comes to mind? Lady Death comes to mind. All that stuff was really popular.
Exactly.
And by the way, that stuff was much more popular for me. I have a bunch of Lady Death, and I do have some Witchblade, but I don't have any Warrior Nun.
Yeah, but I'm just going to point that out because it's interesting because I think contextually, the way that they make the show work is it fits within that modern context, and they've kind of retooled it, to kind of again to fit in with that modern approach. But it's interesting because the character, when you dial it back, I mean, she comes out of the bad girl era of comics. Now that doesn't cheapen anything. That doesn't change the value or the context of the story. I don't mean it any way like that. It's just that sex appeal was part of what they would use. You know what I mean, to kind of sell the concept. So it's interesting in this because it's completely different. I don't see them leaning into that at all. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But I just wanted to point that out because it does feel very contemporary because of how they've kind of retooled it to fit within a modern aesthetic. But I just want to point out that this character and a lot of these concepts, they predate this thing quite a bit. So a percentage of what we're seeing was the creator's original intention. And that's kind of neat, that even back then, because, it's kind of cool and weird because for me, most of my comics have had strong female, protagonists that they're always the lead, Akio with Bushy Tails, she's kind of got that chosen one complex kind of idea going on. Mary in Red Skirts is kind of the same way. But I think a lot of us we're just trying to portray just a female lead character because at the time, specifically with Bushy Tails, it was still kind of novel and kind of neat. You'd see it in Aliens and you'd see it in different things, but it wasn't quite like it is like right now in pop culture and current culture where it feels like it's everywhere. So
yeah, that's exactly the problem I'm having. I compare it very much to like the silent film era. And in the old days of the silent film, if you had a villain, he had a top hat and he had a big mustache and he would twirl it menacingly, so you knew he was the villain. Another thing they used to do was the villain always had a black hat, the hero always had a white hat. So you immediately knew, who was who, and it was very, because storytelling was limited back then. You literally didn't have sound. So, you kind of had to do these visual cues so you knew what was going on. The problem is, of course, as that goes on, it becomes really overused, and you kind of like you kind of know things before you really want to. You can't have that reveal that, oh, he's actually the bad guy, that kind of a thing, because you already knew. You knew the guy with the top hat, the black hat, and the mustache. You knew he was the bad guy. that's back like I said, like way back in the silent film era. So over time, those kind of contrived characters, those stereotypes, they became so overused. People just got used to it, and it got boring. And that's kind of what I'm feeling right now with this. Like what you said, there was a time when this stuff was surprising, and you would be like, "Oh, wow, that's kind of a twist." The twist is gone as far as the female, the extremely overpowered female protagonist that is the chosen one. And by the way, I do want to clarify with the Mary Sue issue, because I don't like Mary Sue's, but I'm not accusing this particular show of having a Mary Sue. I am not accusing it of that. The Mary Sue thing is different. The Mary Sue thing is where you feel that the character is just too perfect. I don't feel that this character is too perfect. I don't feel like, it's quote unquote unearned, because in this particular case, again, it's kind of a minor spoiler, but it happens like right away. We're talking about an object that gives her power, as opposed to, her just sort of instantly being a Jedi, for instance, that kind of idea. Because we've never seen that before, where someone's just instantly a Jedi, knows how to use a lightsaber and all that kind of stuff. That's right, kind of where I'm coming from.
Right. And just to clarify, I was just saying that in this current era, that's sort of the thing, that's everyone goes, oh, well, this is a Mary Sue. I wasn't saying that you were saying this character is a Mary Sue. All I was doing was kind of, going ahead and throwing that out there, just because I feel like this doesn't really qualify as the Mary Sue idea in my mind.
No, it doesn't.
Also,
I agree with you,
because this concept goes so far back that it's just a completely different thing. It's just that this was literally just a comic with a strong female lead character. I don't, that was part of the point. So that's all I was saying, is that I don't feel like it qualifies for the quote unquote Mary Sue label, just because it existed before that was really too much a thing in my mind. So
no, I totally agree. I don't think this is a Mary Sue just by the definition of what a Mary Sue even is. What I am having an issue with is the Chosen Ones thing. The Chosen One thing, I've just seen it before, and I've seen it very recently in two major properties that I didn't like it. I didn't like the execution. I thought it was terrible. I'm never going to watch those things ever again. So they're fresh in my mind, and it seems like that's a setup that's being used more and more. And what it leads to is it becomes very predictable, and it takes, for me, it takes some of the fun away, and it kind of just takes away the whole point of, the contrivance before was, again, it was a shock. It was something that was like, oh, well, that's kind of like a neat twist. Now it's just been overused so many more, it's been overused so many times that, to me, it starts to fall flat. Now, that doesn't mean that I hate this first episode. It doesn't mean that I'm not willing to give the series a shot and see how they use this, going forward, this premise going forward. Because the basic premise, I do think, is interesting. I absolutely do think it's interesting. It is intriguing. But as far as just the idea of whether, if I wasn't reviewing it, would I go ahead and watch the second episode? I would say probably not. But if we decide that we want to keep reviewing this, or if the Rogues Gallery is interested in hearing us talk about it more, and remember, in the context that Dave is very intrigued by this show. So it would be kind of interesting contrast with me kind of going in a little bit more deflated, and Dave going in, a little bit more hyped up. That actually could be some good material for our show. So I'm definitely open to continuing to watch it. But I wouldn't say that I would probably watch it. If it was just me, I probably wouldn't watch the second episode.
Interesting. Yeah. So, but no, like I said, I found it kind of intriguing, and I would be interested to see a little bit more of it. But again, that's just my own personal, obviously, opinion. And like I said, I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting it to like the lead character. I expected this to be a little bit more kitschy and kind of, what's the right word? It's interesting because a lot of what you're saying, Eric, I can see that, because they have taken the character and put her in a very modern context. and to the point that the chosen one concept is it is overused, and the way in which they're going about it feels kind of by the numbers. But that being said, I like the lead actress a lot, and because of the specifics surrounding her character, I thought there was an interesting idea to explore. And again, I can't get into that too much without getting into spoilers.
That's a good segue because you said specifics. Why don't we talk about a few spoilers here, so everybody knows if you haven't watched the first episode, this is the time to put your fingers in your ears or whatever. Maybe go and get a drink or something like that, because it's only one episode, so we won't. There's not like a whole lot of spoilers in this anyway.
No.
So why don't we talk about some of those spoilers and talk about what we thought maybe worked or didn't work, what we liked, all that kind of stuff.
Well, the thing I found most interesting is the idea that the lead character was quadriplegic, and that basically she had spent a good period of time, just unable to move or walk or do anything. That was one of the concept I found most interesting about this. She's basically imbued with a powered object that it does bring her back from the dead, essentially. And we see her going out, and at first she's not sure if it's a dream. She's not sure exactly where she is, like referencing like heaven and hell, that kind of idea, or even purgatory for that matter. They don't reference that specifically, but it could have even been purgatory. So she's not sure, and so she decides that she's going to experience as much as she can until the dream ends or she wakes up or what have you. That was the concept I found the most interesting and intriguing, because she is seeing something that she's not quite sure what it is, and she's not sure if it's a delusion or going back to Dante's Inferno, if she's in some level and it's a concept or some part of like a level of hell or whatever. That's what I'm saying. It's like I'm probably reading more into this, and that's what I find the most intriguing. I'm curious to see how they take these ideas and they take these concepts and explore them. So that's why I would be curious to see a second episode, myself. So that's what I found most interesting, is the idea that she was quadriplegic, and now she's able to actually go out and experience and live life on the level that obviously she hasn't been able to do prior to this event. So tell me, Eric, what was the thing that...
Dave, that's actually a perfect example of why I'm kind of on the other side, because I have a different interpretation of that, and it gave me a totally different experience. Because I do think that's intriguing that she was a quadriplegic, and now essentially she's a superhero. She's got superpowers. She even says that in this episode, that basically she has superpowers. But what I didn't like was that I didn't really get to see what it was like for her to be a quadriplegic. I mean, it's basically all through dialogue. We don't even get like a significant flashback. There's like one minor flashback, but there's no significant flashback to even show what that was like. And so I didn't feel like when that scene, when she starts running, I didn't feel like it was earned at all. It just didn't feel earned. It just felt like it was just thrown in there because she's a pretty girl and she's young, and we want to see her running around happy. I had this image in my head of like doing an instant parody, and just think if it was some, fat old man who had been quadriplegic or whatever, and then he had the same scene. Would it work? Would people be as invested if it was a fat old man that was running around frolicking on the beach like that? It would be comedic, right? People would laugh. And so it to me, I just felt like that wasn't really, I think that the premise is intriguing. The premise of a disabled person suddenly getting superpowers, just on its own merits, is an intriguing concept. But we didn't really get into that. And I don't know if maybe they'll go back in flashbacks, but I don't like that. It's like, this is a pilot. I would like to have seen some of her life before this all happened. Now, granted, my guess is that they're going to explain that to us more as the series progresses, because obviously something was going on at that orphanage that's really screwed up, especially with the head nun. But then again, that's another contrivance too. It's like the head nun is always like evil. You know what I mean? Like, she's always a bad person now. I went to school with nuns, okay, when I was young. basically through first through third grade. We had nuns were still pretty prominent at my school. It's kind of funny. Me growing up, there was sort of a transition from there being quite a few nuns at my school to almost none by the time I graduated in 8th grade from elementary school. So when I first started, like first through third grade, we actually did have a lot of nuns. And I remember Sister Valeria in particular, my principal, and she was awesome. She was stern. I mean, she was a hard woman, but she was awesome. I mean, if you behaved yourself, you know what I mean, and you were a reasonable kid, she was all over you. If you misbehaved, she slugged you. You know what I mean? That's just the way they were back then. And I didn't have a problem with that. So, you know, it's kind of funny to me that because now we always see now anybody who's comes from like a religious background or things like that, how it always seems to be depicted negatively. And that's another thing where it's sort of like a contrivance, a new modern contrivance, because back in the day, if you saw a nun in a habit, that was supposed to indicate, hey, this is a good woman. This is a pure woman. This is someone that, you know, that you can trust. You know, now the first nun that we see in this particular episode, she's like really screwed up. She's like talking about how the main character is like a devil spawn and things like that. When literally the first time she met her, she was the victim of a car crash when her parents were basically on vacation, and she became a paraplegic, and that's how she wound up at the orphanage. And it's like, how could you have a problem with someone like that? You know what I mean? What kind of trouble could she really be when she's a quadriplegic? So it's kind of like, you know, you can obviously that head nun is totally evil, totally screwed up. So stuff like that is kind of like, I've seen it so many times now in the modern era, it kind of rubs me the wrong way.
Well, that's, you know, yeah. I mean, like I said, well, not like I said, I can see what you're saying. I can totally see that. I would imagine, you know, that we are going to get some more flashbacks. We are going to get some more explanation. They allude to some things that weren't quite clear to me, and I apologize if I seem distracted. The dogs are in the studio. And because I correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't think they really come right out and say it, but they seem to allude to the idea that you know, that the sort of the priest guy who trains the warrior nuns or is in charge of supervising the warrior nuns, he asks her how she dies. I don't remember. This is really bad because I did just recently see it. Does she say exactly what happened?
No, that's another mystery. How she actually died is not explicitly stated. In fact, if you remember in the very first scene, you know, the priest the initial priest, not the one that's like you mentioned is either right, the trainer or the supervisor, which by the way, we don't know which one he is yet. If he's in some sort of authoritative role over the warrior nuns, but we don't know, like you said, we don't really know exactly what his role is. Is he sort of a mentor? Is he their teacher? Is he just their boss? You know, we don't know. Is he like Charlie's Angels? We don't know. So, but there was a priest in the first scene, and what he was doing was, it was weird. This is another thing that I thought was really weird. Essentially, it's like his church is like a morgue. And so he's cataloging this death of this girl from the orphanage. And he asked for the reason of death. And the nun, the evil nun, she's all like, no, just leave that blank. And he doesn't challenge it and just says, well, you know, that's kind of like against procedure or whatever, but okay, we'll go there. And then later on, the character you're talking about, the other priest, when he's doing his investigation to find out more about this corpse that came to life and ran away with their holy object, he again asks about how did she die, and we don't really get an answer. So clearly she's hiding something. Obviously the nun is hiding something. The one who runs the orphanage, she's hiding something, and she had something in for the girl, you know, as far as like some sort of, I don't know, some sort of personality conflict or something, that she just hated this girl for some reason, who again was a quadriplegic. So it's like, you kind of sit there like, what would be the motivation for hating someone like that? Other than the fact, I guess, that you had to take care of them, which I can understand, you know, that could build resentment over time. But it's kind of like, well, that why'd you become a nun then if that's not what you want to do? So there is something going on there, and I would assume we'll get more information, later in the show, later in the series.
See, I seem to have the impression, judging by the way that the head nun lady was acting, that maybe the lead character, the reason or how she had died might have been from suicide, because that's quite a sin, and in certain religions it means you cannot enter heaven, and I could see that partially being the reason why the nun has such a really powerfully negative reaction to this young girl who's quadriplegic. If she felt like she just gave up and committed suicide, it might explain some of the judgment coming from her that is quite so harsh, because that is in certain religions that is such a sin, and in some religions it's unforgivable. So.
Right, and that's an interesting take, because I got the opposite take. I got the homicide vibe, that she killed her because she didn't want to take care of her anymore. So that's interesting, and that is something that I would be interested to see how that pans out in the series, as far as whether it is suicide, homicide, or maybe it's something neither one of us is even thinking about.
Yeah, that would be interesting. So, like I said, that's part of the reason why I found it intriguing. And again, my suicide thing, that goes back to, again, what I said before. I am projecting into this story what I think is happening, and I am, moving the chess pieces around on the board and, answering my own questions and going, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if they're going to do that. And then, as we have learned, those of you who've been part of the Retro Rogues for a little while, I am often wrong with a lot of these ideas and suggestions and theories they have. And then I end up falling in love with my own ideas that I put together in my head and go, this totally sucks. It was nothing like I thought it was going to be. So,
although we did that with The Mandalorian, and we were wrong about, I don't think we got one thing right in our prediction of The Mandalorian when we did our lead up, but we ended up enjoying the series overall.
Oh, yeah.
So It's kind of funny. So even though it didn't hit any of our expectations, because, by the way, that is an accusation in toxic fandom all the time. That, oh, well, you're just upset because it didn't do what your little fan theory said, and you're an asshole and blah, 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 blah. No, that's not the case at all. Sometimes I just don't think it works. It's not because I thought that it's not like I'm going to hate this show because it turns out that Dave's theory is correct and she did suicide when I think she was murdered. That in itself would not make me like or dislike the show. It's all in how they present it, all in how it's implemented, and whether I ultimately feel that's earned or not. And it makes sense, and I go, oh yeah, that made sense. Maybe there was some little foreshadowing in that first episode that told us something. Obviously, Dave is seeing something there where he thinks, hey, I think she might have killed herself. Whereas I'm thinking she may have been murdered by the nun. So we have these different theories. One theory or not is not what's going to make me like or dislike the show. It's all in how they implement it. That's what it comes down to. If it feels earned and it feels like it makes sense with the rest of the show that we've watched so far. Dave, your mic is muted.
My bad. Sorry.
No problem.
Still getting used to that.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, here's the long and the short of it. I mean, I don't have any other spoilers I really want to talk about. I found it intriguing. So let's just bottom line it here. Unless you have anything else you want to add, Eric. I mean, you said that you're not sure unless we were reviewing it for the show. Bobby Chambers has a comment here. He actually just chimed in and said, was looking to check this show out. Do you guys think you will continue with it? So I think we should just get right to it and answer the question. I would be interested to watch episode 2.
Absolutely. Okay.
So just to see if any of my theory about the suicide is correct, and to see if they get further into the action, and to see how much more inspiration it takes from Blade. Now, Eric, how do you feel? I mean, would you be down to watch a second
Oh,
episode, or you kind of go,
absolutely.
okay,
Especially because of Bobby's comment, because he said he's
okay,
looking to check out the show. So yeah, I'd be willing to definitely go to episode 2. So one thing I wanted to mention that's weird about Netflix that I've come to doing a show. I've come to determine I don't like this. Netflix does a dump. So basically, all the episodes are already available. Netflix really encourages binge watching, and it does make it difficult when you're reviewing a show because you don't know how long the Warrior Nun wave is going to last now. It's number 2 in the United States on Netflix right now. Interestingly, by the way, number 1 is Unsolved Mysteries. I didn't realize they did a revamp of Unsolved Mysteries, which I love that show growing up, and that's number 1 on Netflix right now. Crazy. But number 2 is Warrior Nun. And so we don't know if it's going to be number 2 next week because because what happens on Netflix is pretty much anybody who wants to watch it has already watched it, you know? So it'll be interesting to see how that works out because it looks like we are going to do episode 2. And so we'll kind of see how that pans out because when we did Picard, CBS All Access released a new episode every week. When we did Mandalorian, both the regular show and Disney Gallery, they released one episode every week. So it allowed us to be very topical and review something that was coming out brand new every week. So that'll be interesting, too, to see how that goes as far as us reviewing the second episode of a Netflix series when I think a lot of people just binged it and, they've already watched the whole thing. So they already know everything. They know more than me, you know what I mean? Because I haven't watched any of the rest of the series yet. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. But yeah, I'm definitely down for it.
cool. Well, interesting. We'll do that then because I was searching for images, to put together the graphics for the show, and yeah, there was already people who were already just like, Warrior Nun, the ending explained. I'm like, does the ending need explanation?
Well, the other thing is maybe before the next episode, I can pick up a copy of one of the comics. And so I can actually provide a little bit more commentary about how I feel that works, because I do think that's relevant. Clearly this is not an adaptation of the comic. It's very different. It's like a comic. It's like a tie-in to the comic book. It's inspired by the comic book. And those are two very different things. And I think sometimes for the fans, that can be very disappointing. The fact that they don't really get to see the story that they know and love transformed to the screen, because that's what a lot of us want. We want to see what we saw in the comic book or what we read in the book or what we even saw in the television series when they make a movie. We want to see that in there. And this is clearly kind of its own thing. It's different. So that's one thing that I'm going to try to do is maybe get a little bit more on the comics to give a little bit more of that perspective of, what maybe I like in the comics and like in the series or vice versa, or, where the conflict is where I don't like it, that kind of thing.
Interesting. Cool. So it sounds like, Bobby, we are going to give the second episode a go and see what we think. I like I said, I'm curious to see how the second episode unfolds because, like I said, I found the first one to be interesting, to me. So this will be fun. We'll check out the second episode and see how we feel about it. Cool.
Right on.